described as the most vicious murder in recent history here locally. 8 gang members brutally beat, tortured, and killed a man once they found out he spoke with police.
Prosecutors are about to take some of those suspects to court. Ryan Kruger got exclusive access to the case.
We're following some breaking news in Atlanta right now.
On a fall day 3 years ago,
Police have just discovered a man's body in the trunk of a car.
At the Hamilton E. Holmes MARTA station, an unimaginably gruesome discovery is made in the trunk of this car.
This was one of the most brutal killings or murders that we had ever seen.
Since then, 8 men have been arrested. 5 are already serving life in prison, with another trial coming soon. Prosecutors tell me the defendants have not shown any remorse.
He was an awesome dad. He had 2 little boys that he loved and would have done anything for.
Christopher Dean wanted to turn his life around. He figured one last drug deal, he'd be able to turn clean, but he never got that chance. When he arrived at the home of brothers Xavier and Orlando Gibson, both members of the street gang Gangster Disciples.
They pounced on him as soon as he arrived.
It turns out Dean had once cooperated with authorities in California years ago. That case had no relevance to any of the Atlanta gang members.
It was about just the concept of being someone who was bold enough to cooperate with the police.
For more than an hour, 5 of the suspects beat Dean with a crowbar and a 2x4. They also sodomized him and tortured him before ultimately executing him.
They beat him to the point that his skull was actually depressed.
Jasper Green and Lamar Allman were hired to burn the body and all the evidence, but instead, they left the car at the MARTA station. The trunk was full of all the weapons used to torture Dean. And at the defendant's house, it was even worse. Prosecutors gave me these never-before-seen images from the case files. The defendants continued living in the house with bloodstains everywhere.
I'm bothered by the fact that they were comfortable enough to let the evidence of the crime just sit for 30 days.
5 of the suspects are currently serving life in prison. 2 more will soon go to trial, and the final suspect testified against the others. Prosecutors hope these sentences serve as a wake-up call to the community about the brutality of gang violence.
The sheer brutality of what had happened. They were obviously attempting to send a message to fellow gang members and anyone who might dare to testify against them that if you did it, this would be what would happen to you. So they lured Mr. Dean, the victim, over to this residence, and it looks like they pounced on him as soon as he arrived.
A month later, the law enforcement that responded to the scene to process it, they could see blood with the naked eye up against their refrigerators, along the sides of the walls, on their clothing, and they were just living among them.
Next tonight, we are going to revisit one of the most dangerous new criminal organizations in the country. When we first reported on a street gang called the Gangster Disciples last year, they were terrorizing entire neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. They were making a fortune peddling illegal drugs, and they were putting their manpower behind local politicians they favored. We're coming back to them tonight because their ambition is larger. The Gangster Disciples of Chicago have gone national. The result of an ABC News investigation from Aaron Hayes.
Where'd he go? Put your hands.
Police in Mobile, Alabama never expected they'd be waging battle against organized national gangs.
Keep your hands where I can see them.
But those gangs are here.
To the heart, man.
They're armed.
This is 25 automatic, rapid fire, you know.
And they are dangerous. These gangs are the nation's notorious Big Three. From Los Angeles, the Bloods and the Crips. And from Chicago, the Gangster Disciples, known in Mobile as Gangster Disciple Folk. Their sign, Satan's Pitchfork, is the most prominent in Mobile.
When you see that pitchfork, that's Gangster Disciples. This isn't artwork. This is saying something. This is claiming a territory.
Why would big city gangs stake out territory in Mobile, a quiet southern seaport thousands of miles away from the gangs' home cities? They want it for one reason. It is just one more market where they can sell drugs.
They ain't down here to live. They ain't down to stay. They down here for money and money only.
It is a serious and deadly business.
We've had a tremendous increase in homicides, in robberies and assaults, and much of this is gang-related.
Because we had people moving in from the bigger cities, seeing a market that was available,
A very good market in small cities like Mobile, where drugs are worth more because supply is limited.
We got a couple of rocks, little ones.
Crack cocaine brings at least 3 times the money it would in big cities.
Oh, we sell dope.
And they're luring local kids to do the selling. These Mobile gang members told ABC News they were recruited by a Chicago gangster disciple who came here and fronted them drugs.
He front us dope, you know what I'm saying? Like he front me about $200. I go sell it on the corner. I can make about $500 back.
It is the profit potential in the illegal drug trade that has transformed the gangs into the nation's newest organized crime syndicates. And Chicago's gangster disciples are among the most aggressive. Not content with the drug business netting them $500 million a year, they're after more. According to the FBI, the gangster disciples have already set up new gang franchises in 150 cities across the country. They target cities with access to the interstate highways, which give them an easy way to transport drugs. Cities like Springfield, Missouri, on Interstate 44. 16 Chicago gangster disciples were arrested there this fall, their weapons confiscated, charged with drug dealing.
This is not the end of the problem. We have to keep going, otherwise this thing will consume our city.
On Interstate 25, Colorado Springs, gang conflicts here escalated after the gangster disciples moved in last year competing for drug turf. There have been 30 shootings here since August.
All right, put your hand, come up here.
The gang also looks for cities where police are not ready for them.
They study the market. Well, it's the size of the police force. How are they trained? How are their investigators? They do a good analysis of the area. Organized crime always does that.
In Mobile, police have recently stepped up patrols and other efforts to slow gang growth.
We got a warrant for you.
Still, the gangs remain a powerful draw.
The Gangster Disciples, when they come down here from Chicago, they come with the money, the protection, the security.
Gang members become so loyal, some tattoo themselves with the gangster pitchfork. They follow bylaws calling for allegiance to Gangster City, Chicago, and to the Gangster Disciple chairman, a convicted Chicago murderer named Larry Hoover. There are an estimated 1,600 Gangster Disciples in the Mobile area, and the gang is working to recruit more.
I'm like a scout. I'm scouting for the best gangster we can find to serve our organization with love. Somebody willing to die for the cause.
Sadly, more and more are willing to die and to kill. One of the first to recognize the seriousness of the gang problem here was Reverend Charles Harris.
And I've been crying out over the past year to do something about our gang problem and serious juvenile problem.
Harris has been trying to help gang members find positive outlets for their energies, get them away from gang life. He knows too well how difficult that can be. He says the gangster disciples successfully recruited his own son. Harris has not been able to convince him to break the gang ties.
I cannot compete with the gang. Wherever there's a kid that's looking for an opportunity to make some money and they can exploit that kid, they will use him. They will use him either until he's incarcerated or until he's dead.
All in $10 bills.
Because this is about money. The kids are the labor force for the national criminal gangs, and they are expendable. Often, so is the community. Many have learned the hard lesson that by the time the signs are up, the gangs are probably already in business. Aaron Hayes, ABC News, Mobile, Alabama.
We'll have more news.
Sentences for 5 convicted gang members kicks off tonight's speed feed.
Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard calls their crime the most brutal murder in recent Atlanta history. These 5 men were convicted of the murder of Christopher Dean, who used to be a police informant in California. Dean was tortured and murdered when they found out who he was. The victim's father spoke to the court just before the judge handed down the sentences.
It was so very hard for me to tell a 5-year-old his daddy would never come home. My heart will always miss Chris.
2 more suspects charged in Dean's death have yet to go to trial.
Sir. He's fine.
He was trying to redirect you.
Good morning, y'all.
Good morning, Mr. Dean.
My My name is Larry Dean. I'm Christopher's father. Chris was getting his life on the right track. He told me he had a few things he had to do before he quit the drug dealing. Unfortunately, Chris never got to do things. Chris's family life was great with his two sons. They were everything to him. Chris always took CJ to school and picked him up every day. We spent a lot of time with each other. We lived together. Chris and I were very close, and especially with my grandson CJ. His death has affected the family greatly. It was so very hard for me to tell a 5-year-old his daddy would never come home. CJ wanted to know why, and I explained it to him the best I knew how. We all have empty space in our hearts for Chris. There will never be no more birthday celebrations, no more Christmas days, no more opening Christmas presents, no more Thanksgiving dinners. Aaron, his youngest son, he was one when Chris passed. He will never know his dad except through what CJ can teach him. My heart will always miss Chris. And thank you for letting me speak about my son.
You're welcome, Mr. Dean. Thank you.
I'm going to approach with the certifying.
Yes.
What's going on, you guys? Welcome back. Another episode of Green Lake Gang TV. Appreciate you guys checking out the channel. Man, today's story is pretty crazy. We're going to be going to Atlanta. We're going to be covering a case involving the Gangster Disciples, a national street gang known for their violence, known for music. When I think of the Gangster Disciples, I think of Chicago, okay? And they're also known for Larry Hoover, right? One of the most well-known gang members in our culture and American history. The Gangster Disciples actually came around in the late 60s, early 70s with the forming of two gangs. The Black Disciples and the Supreme Gangsters. They came together. Now, the other name people don't sometimes forget about is a guy by the name of David Barksdale. Also a very, very well-known gang leader during this time. They came together. They formed the Gangster Disciples. Now, when you talk to like Larry Hoover, Barksdale at the time, some of these other guys, they claim it's kind of like an activist group. It's not a gang. We're not a street gang. We're nonviolent. And to be honest, that's just not true. They are a national gang. They have put in just as much work as these other gangs. They are violent, extortion, rackets, pimping, prostitution, drug dealing, murder for hire, kidnapping, everything under the sun. And this case highlights that to an extreme. And the younger generation just seems to get more violent, right? This case took place in 2019, and the level of human depravity, the lack of consciousness, just the lengths people are willing to go. And you kind of see the group mentality, right? Because this was a larger group of guys. And we're going to get into why it felt like they kept one-upping each other. And the man that received all this and the victim in this case, a guy by the name of Christopher Dean, he had about the absolute worst murder that I've read about in a long time. And so there were 7 or 8 people involved in total, but there were 5 really at the core. that we're going to kind of focus on here. So 5 members of the Gangster Disciples street gang were found guilty Monday of torturing, sodomizing, and murdering a police informant in 2016. We're going to get to that informant part, though, in a minute. Then leaving his body in the trunk of a car in an Atlanta metro station. Christopher Lockett, age 30, Xavier Gibson, 23, Quatez Clark, 21, Joshua Rooks, 27, and Jasper Green, 27, were convicted of murder, participating in criminal street gang activity, and other felony charges, the Fulton County DA's office said in a statement. The 5 men, all members of the Gangster Disciples, killed Christopher Dean, 33 years old, at a house in Atlanta in October of 2016 after finding out he was once a police informant in California, according to authorities. Now, obviously, the murder happened in Atlanta. He was once a police informant in California. I am not justifying telling or snitching. If you're in the streets, if you're a rat, if you're an informant and you get found out, you know what might happen. That's part of the game. You chop it up to the game. You move on. But what they did to him is not just, hey, man, you know what? You cooperated before. You're still out here. You're making drug deals. You're making moves. They found out. It's what happens. No. They tortured. When I say tortured, they tortured Christopher Dean in all of the worst ways possible. Think of the worst things you can do to somebody. It happened to him. Okay? So, Christopher Lockett, the ringleader, the DA said he was the ringleader. He invited Christopher Dean to Xavier and Orlando Gibson's Atlanta home, the DA's office said. Dean was going to the house to complete a drug transaction, but before he arrived, and I don't know how, but Christopher Lockett found out about Dean's police past, and the men devised a plan to torture Dean. Now, again, I don't know how he found out. 2, I don't agree with how the media painted Christopher Dean as like, you know, obviously he's a good guy. He's a good dad, right? But 2 things can be true because they tried to say that, well, this was going to be his last drug deal and, man, one more and he's out. It's like, okay, I'm just going to call it like it is. I don't think Christopher Dean was up there moving such significant weight that he was just, I got one more in me and then I'm done. This is my big score. It's like, no, he was selling drugs. He was making moves. I'm sure he was trying to better his life, but the streets got to pull, man. That fast money, that easy money, it's got to pull. Okay, I don't know if addiction or anything like that. I can't really tell in any of the pictures, that I see with him. It just sounds like he was hustling on the side. He was trying to make some extra money, provide for the family, which is okay, but I just don't like the whole idea that the media was trying to say, man, this was his last one, and I'm not falling for that. So, immediately upon entering the house of Xavier and Orlando Gibson's Atlanta home, Christopher Dean is encountered with these guys, and they jump right into it. He encounters Christopher Lockett, the Gibson brothers, Quatez Clark, and Joshua Rooks. For over an hour, he was brutally beaten with a 2x4 and a crowbar. You see that in the pictures I put up with the blood stains on both of those items. The defendants also SA'd the victim with a handle-like object for over an hour. And I thought it stopped there. No, there was also DNA, human DNA, found inside of Christopher Dean. That's where I really part with these guys. I'm not going to lie. When I heard that, I went, I'm done. I don't care what happens to you guys. And I try to keep my opinions out of these, but it's like, okay, guys, I'm out. I'm out all the way on it. And whatever happens to you, you've got to answer to God for a lot of this stuff. And just best of luck, because that is animal-like behavior. If I'm just going to call it like it is, that is absolute animal-like behavior. The DA's office goes on to say, quote, following the savage beating and torture, the defendants shot the victim twice in the back of the head. Rooks then picked up Jasper Green and Lamar Ullman, and the 3 returned to the scene of the murder, where Christopher Lockett paid Lamar Ullman and Jasper Green to clean up, quote, brain matter and blood from the scene of the murder and to, quote, burn the victim's body and his car. Now, these guys were not the brightest. They did not burn the victim's body in the car, which would get rid of a lot of that DNA and a lot of things that, like the murder weapons that were in the trunk of the car. Maybe you'd want to get rid of those. It's like, no, they neatly put everything the police are going to need in the car. Here's the 2x4. Here's the crowbar. Here's the body. We're going to leave all our DNA on him, and we're going to put a bow on it, and we're going to park it at these housing projects and hey, come find us. So originally, the perpetrators were going to burn Lockett's car with Dean's body inside, but Green and Allman decided just to leave the car and the body in the trunk. It's like, oh my God, how dumb. I'm just going to call it how dumb. Dean's body was eventually discovered at the H.E. Holmes MARTA station, and all 7 defendants, like I said, 8 total, 7 at the time, were eventually arrested in connection to the crime. Following the guilty verdict of these 5, they were still waiting on a couple more, and we're going to talk about one of those guys in particular. Following the guilty verdict, Fulton County District Attorney Paul L. Howard said that the crime represented the most horrific death in the county's history. Quote, "My greatest fear is that we would choose to do nothing and the violence would happen again and again," he said in a statement. Sad, 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 all the way around. Now, after the sentencing and all that, Xavier Gibson, one of the owners of the house, he said, "Even though the torture and murder took place at my home, that doesn't mean I knew about it." He goes on to say, "I would like to say I send my condolences. I'm sorry for y'all loss," Gibson said. Gibson apologized to the family of Dean. But then he goes on to say, "I don't know what else to prove. I wasn't there, nor did I have any parts in this." So he denies everything, Gibson said. Before sentencing, Christopher Dean's father, which I showed you guys the clip of that, told the court Dean's 5-year-old son still asks about his dad. Quote, it was so very hard for me to tell a 5-year-old his daddy would never come home," end quote, Larry Dean said. The judge said all of this could have been avoided. To me, this whole situation is still one about choices and making the right choices. 2 other men will face trials for their alleged roles in the murder. And we're going to get to those guys in just a minute. And I'm not going to go on a rant here, but that's what life's about, guys, okay? Choices. That's all it's about. Comment down below. I want to know what you guys think about this. But in this case, even me, I don't even know half of what to say. It's just absolutely crazy, man. But that's the judge hit it right on the head. That's life. It's about choices. And what I was going to talk about in the beginning, I mentioned it with the gang and the mob mentality is, I think part of the reason this crime got so crazy and these horrific details came out is because, you've got this guy who's, okay, guys, he's a police informant. He's a snitch. What are we going to do about it, right? And if you're trying to prove yourself, and if you're trying to prove to the gang, I'm more violent than the next guy, I'm more crazy, I'm more sadistic than the next guy, I think that mob mentality kind of takes over, and you're trying to one-up each other, right? Oh, he did this, he beat him with a 2x4, I'm going to do this. He did this, I'm going to do this, and it just culminates in this awful, awful death. Really quick, there was another guy, Shakur Wright, that got caught up in this. Another gang, the headline reads, "Another gang member convicted in the most horrific death in recent Atlanta history. He is linked to other crimes." Okay? So, 3 separate crimes, 2 murders, and an armed robbery. Says each have something in common. 23-year-old Shakur Wright. He ended up getting life He actually pled out guilty in all the cases. But, it's kind of interesting because this guy really had a crime spree, right? He had committed multiple murders, this robbery, all this stuff. It all happened in 2016. So, there's that. I put pictures up of him. It just stands out because even as awful as what those guys did, it's like, man, these guys are young. Some of them, man. Shakur Wright, 23 years old. Okay, some of these guys were in their 30s, and I get it. By that time, it's like, okay, you've probably been to prison. If you're an active gang member, you've probably been in and out of the system. But some of these guys, man, it's like you're throwing your lives away so young. And it never, in all these other cases I've done, man, we go to California, we cover norteños, serranos, when we cover guys in prison committing murders that maybe we're going to be out in a couple years. They go and they commit a murder, and now they're booked. They're done for life. It just, it's pretty shocking. But this one really did bother me. This was, pretty sad to read. So there you guys have it, the murder of Christopher Dean, the hands of the Gangster Disciples in Atlanta. I appreciate you guys checking this video out. Until next time, later.